My name is Dr. Bill Hunter, and I manage the partnership between Lehigh University and the United Nations, and have had the pleasure of working with Saudi Arabian students for almost 20 years. Today's event is sponsored by the Lehigh University United Nations Partnership and the Middle Eastern Students Association. It's a pleasure to have them as a partner. Special thanks also to Lehigh student Dan Rudiak, who has led our marketing efforts for the program and will offer today's formal vote of thanks. And in particular to Dr. Fahad Al-Shatri, who is the Deputy Governor for Supervision for the Saudi Arabian Monetary Authority, a Lehigh alum, a very proud Lehigh alum, who has enabled the connections to our speaker today. A little bit of background on the UN partnership. So Lehigh University became a UN accredited NGO, non-governmental organization, in 2004. For those of you unfamiliar with NGOs, think Greenpeace, Doctors Without Borders, Red Cross, and then of course Lehigh University. So in normal times, Lehigh sends busloads of students to the United Nations every week for conferences, briefings, workshops, and in particular engagements with ambassadors. We've had the pleasure to meet with the Saudi Arabian ambassador in the past, which is truly a memorable experience for many of us. We also work very closely with the UN on a number of different pillars focused on sustainable development, youth engagement, social justice, health, and other related sort of climate change issues. In particular, when the United Nations Environment Program, the Assistant Secretary General, decided to create a team of students from a university to work on a project called Greening of the UN Missions, helping the UN to become more sustainable, he chose, from all universities in the world, he chose Lehigh University. And so Lehigh is piloting the transition for helping missions, UN missions, around the UN itself to become more green, more efficient. I see Sarah, who was on that team. Pleasure to see you today, joining us from Bahrain. And so we've had a very close relationship with UNEP, serving on a number of committees based out of Nairobi and other locations. And Lehigh has done considerable research in sustainable development, which certainly leads us to this presentation today. When life returns and the UN opens again, we will offer these same programs, engaging directly with the UN itself, getting students to sit across the table from global decision makers. We also founded the world's first ever UN Youth Representative Program. That's managed by my colleague Whitney Smotis, who is with us today. This is the opportunity to give young people at Lehigh the voice, to give NGOs around the world the opportunity to have a voice that they did not have before, representing them at the United Nations. Now, the relationship between Lehigh University and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia extends over many decades, and it's been very mutually beneficial. For those of you who don't know, Saudi Arabia's Minister of Oil, Minister Ali Naimi, has been a student at Lehigh, has walked the hills and been in our classrooms. Many Saudi students have studied science, social sciences, engineering, math, and many other disciplines since the 1960s. Saudi Arabian future business leaders have come to become regular attendees at the Global Village for Future Leaders of Business and Industry, and we regularly host students from King Abdullah University of Science and Technology as exchange students on our campus. As I mentioned, several years ago, we had the pleasure of meeting the Saudi Arabian ambassador to the United Nations, where we hosted a large group of students in New York for a private meeting discussing a wide variety of topics, including oil, Iran, and women's rights. And today, let's shift to our speaker, Dr. Nayef AlMusehel, who is a Deputy Minister for Policy and Strategic Planning at the Saudi Arabian Ministry of Energy. A bit about his background. He has more than 15 years of experience in transitional leadership, strategy development, economics, and policy setting. He is currently the Deputy Minister for Policy and Strategy, planning with the Minister of Energy, and he's responsible for the integrated energy strategy for the country, which is an effort that aims to provide a holistic and integrated view of the sector's initiatives and responsibilities. Before he joined the ministry, he was a Director of Advisory Services and a research fellow engaged in energy strategy, economic modeling, and energy sector research. What he mentioned to us before was he's also been engaged directly with the World Bank, and he holds several degrees, including a Ph.D. from American University and George Mason, and he tells us he's been in the US since the 6th grade. So, Dr. AlMusehel, it is a pleasure to have you with us this afternoon. We greatly appreciate you taking the time to meet with our students. We look forward to your presentation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bill, and thanks for everyone that's attending this. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you for inviting me to discuss the future of the energy sector, at least from the lens of the kingdom. I'm pleased to discuss the past efforts of what we have done, the current efforts, and what we aspire the future of the energy sector to be. It's a very important topic. And the energy sector is really the key enabling engine that stimulates economic growth and economic activity. So I'll attempt to be concise, holistic, and hopefully we'll have you out by lunchtime, and that will be dinner time for myself. So let me, I'm trying to see how to, okay. So I guess not. All right, there we go. So energy security, affordability, sustainability, the infamous trilemma of the sector. It's really at the heart of what we do as energy professionals and policymakers. It's about the balance between these three different factors and given the priorities for that sector for a certain economy. Although this is a great framework to view the pillars of energy policy, I've learned through the many years of strategy setting and planning one simple fact. You set your plan, you gather your data, you get your forecasts, you look at your trends, you formulate a theory, and you take out the outliers, and you feel invincible, really. Strategy, check. Plan, check. Sudden ability of omnipotence, check. All of that works out. And then, suddenly, you get an exogenous shock, such as the COVID-19, financial crisis, and many others. And what happens to your plan A? Well, it's out the window. And you start hearing people in chaos. So let's go to plan B, and suddenly just somebody saying, just wing it and see what happens. So now what? And I'm reminded of a proverb that I always keep in my line of sight is we make plans and God laughs. And this is true because what's missing out of that framework, it's really flexibility, which is synonymous with adaptability and optionality. So energy transition should be realistic with optionality that accommodates the heterogeneous economies. Adding that flexibility, or if I at least had some say in that framework, I would definitely add that as a cornerstone, which will enable us to look at multiple solutions for a given problem. So environmental stewardship, for example, it's not only renewables, it's not only cleaner fuels, it's not only demand side management. There are multiple methods and solutions, and flexibility is the key. And I will come and discuss this later in the presentation. But before we do that, I'd like to take you on a journey. And that journey is how the kingdom managed to go from an energy intensive, hydrocarbon net exporting nation to an energy leader in the global dimension. Quick stylized facts, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is a global energy leader. It's ranked 18th in terms of GDP of around 790 billion as of 2019. We have a young and fast growing population. Out of the 34 million, 70% is below 40 years old, including myself, by the way. So I'm happy to report that. It has an ambitious transformation program. We produce around 10 million barrels, and our reserves are around 266 billion barrels. Natural gas, we're around 118 BCMs in terms of production, and around 9 trillion in terms of reserves. And available power capacity around 75 gigawatt. Now, this is primarily thermal, but we will discuss this as part of the energy mix in the upcoming slides. So all of these endowments, we had an issue actually in the 1990s until 2012, so more than 2 decades. Energy intensity in the kingdom, if you measure it as kilograms per oil of oil equivalent per GDP, was increasing. By 2012, we were around 65% of energy intensity. So it was a problem. And it took a large transformation effort to meet that challenge. So in 2009, the designated national authority was established, which focused on environmental policy. The Saudi Energy Efficiency Center and the Saudi Energy Efficiency Program were established thereafter. Nuclear program, renewable energy, power sector integration, and more recently, energy and water price reform, a targeted energy mix, oil sustainability program or hydrocarbon sustainability program, a local content program, and the circular carbon economy. Now, what you see outlined in the dashed blue line, these are the deep dives that we'll go into briefly, just to give you a flavor of some of these different programs that we have. Prior to 2016, actually, it was two ministries. It was the Ministry of Petroleum and Mineral Resources and the Ministry of Water and Electricity. In 2016, these were merged to become the Ministry of Energy, Industry, and Mineral Resources. And as of last year in August, it was the Ministry of Energy, focused completely on the energy sector and sustainability for a better future. So this transformation wasn't easy and it wasn't done overnight. There were a number of involvements from ministries, government bodies, other organizations, and including research centers and universities and academics, as well as operators and regulators. And these have created a program. Now, if I'm able to sum them up, we can call it the energy strategy or Saudi Arabia's ambition. And that's primarily what we do, or at least what I do in my deputyship. So it looks at the supply factors. So what are the power sector integration policies? What are the energy mix targets that we're heading towards? How do we implement renewable energy and enforce it? And how do we look at nuclear energy? So it looks at the different supply of energy products. And it looks at demand as well. So what about efficiency? What about demand side management? What about reforms? What about local content? What about the enablers that we have? More importantly, sustainability, which is synonymous with circular carbon economy, oil sustainability program, and ensuring that there is this flexibility for us to move forward. To date, I'm happy to report that we have an integrated energy strategy that has looked at this complex system domestically, and of course, by extension, to the global marketplace on how we deal with our hydrocarbons. There is a reduction of domestic consumption. There are restructured prices, encouraging domestic investments and efficiencies, optimized energy mix for least cost and utilizing cutting-edge technology, enhanced energy security, and more importantly, increased sustainability of the energy ecosystem. Today, 6 years later, we went from a whopping 65% increase to a negative 8% deceleration in our energy intensity consumption. And in the next slides, we'll show you how this was achieved. All programs that we have in the energy sector, they are focusing on three primary pillars. We have a set of guiding principles, a mandate and governance of the organization, and best-in-class programs and management. And these are implemented even in the ministry under the direction of His Royal Highness, Prince Abdulaziz. So from the first one, if we look at the 5 guiding principles that we use, one government, one team. This looks at what are the requirements for ministry, for example, the industrial sector. What about the hydrocarbon? It is understood that the energy sector is a key enabler to achieve any of these targets that we have, whether it's the Vision 2030, whether it's diversification, and as well it should be, even on the global environment and the global marketplace. Energy will fuel or does fuel economic growth. It is consensus driven, so it's not my opinion or my way or the highway. It is a bottom-up approach which ensures that there is techno-economic analysis looking at the different solutions in order to reach a specific policy. It is fact-based and there is ownership and accountability. This is an example of one of the programs, which is for the Saudi Energy Efficiency Program. It has mobilized over 150 professionals from 30 plus entities. It is segmented into technical teams. There are ad hoc execution teams. There's a review and coordination team, and all of that reports to a steering committee that is represented from all the stakeholders in the sector. So it ensures that there are multiple dimensions or vantage points to each problem presented, whether it deals with environment, whether it deals with sustainability, demand, or technological change. A final pillar is collaboration with all stakeholders. And there is a high meeting cadence. There are weekly, sometimes bi-weekly meetings for the technical teams, weekly updates to the different committees, and of course, monthly meeting for the executive committees. There is a consistent operating method and a systematic approach and simplified, organized and tracking. This is very important because if you institutionalize all of these different components, you are able to reach effective results that are pragmatic, realistic, and give the best policy decision going forward. A quick overview of the energy strategy. So it's really integrating across three key energy pillars. That's oil, refined products and petchems, gas, and then utility and alternative energy, which is, of course, thermal, renewables, and nuclear. We have 6 strategic objectives: maintenance or maintaining prominence in world energy markets, economic development, local content, security and resiliency of supply, fiscal optimization, efficiency, and carbon management. A look at the guiding principles. Number 1, adaptable strategy. It needs to be adaptable. It needs to be flexible. It needs to be smart in terms of the goals that we set, that they are specific, measurable, attainable, and key performance indicators are easily seen and continuously monitored and updated for integration and stress tested. So this was broken down into 3 phases. The first phase is the national energy strategy. It has an outlook of 10 to 20 years, and it is updated on a triennial basis. So every 3 years, we update that strategy. Some of its output include the energy mix for the kingdom. This is for power, for transport, for industry. There are long-term pricing reforms. We look at energy resource allocation to best achieve highest economic growth, and looking at energy and supply and demand. The second phase is about the tactical moves in between. It has an outlook for 5 years. It looks at, for example, power sector fuel and technology mix, including what are the renewable targets for the next 5 years, the availability of these different components. And finally, you have the initiatives which are carried over and discussed with the stakeholders. And it has a time horizon of 1 to 2 years, and they are continuously monitored, such as energy efficiency targets, renewable energy projects, capacity development plans, and so on. A subcomponent of this, and it's just to give you a flavor of the power sector energy mix. We look at key input parameters. What are the fuel availabilities? What is the technology cost and performance today? What are the must-run plants that we can't really gamble with phasing them out or retiring them? And what are the system requirements for a reliable energy system? The objective, number 1, optimize system cost. System reliability, of course, environmental goals are part of this. And we look at the other goals and measures, such as the macro metrics, for example, GDP per terawatt hours and jobs created and whatnot. While we integrate all of this, we look at the different technologies that we have. Again, if you look at this, the theme comes back. It's optionalities, it's flexibilities. We have gas, photovoltaic, wind, nuclear, CSP, geothermal, you name it. And all of that, how does it integrate in the mix? Well, if it does improve the cost, reliability, and environmental stewardship, then that gets implemented so long as the techno-economics make sense. Another program that's key to having gas, renewables compete with oil or liquids. As you know, Saudi is one of the few countries that burns crude for power generation. And this happened in the past, of course. Our plans are to displace these liquids, valuable liquids. And at some point in time in the past, gas was thought to be scarce. But with the discovery of the Jafurah Basin, we have ample sources of gas to allow and enable the implementation or the penetration of renewables as well as displacement of liquids. But more importantly, if these are not priced correctly, then they are not competitive on a global scale or even domestically. And that's where the energy and water price reform program comes in. It looks at stimulating rational consumption, encouraging competitive investments in the industrial sector, redirecting and rationalizing incentives provided to eligible segments, and strengthen the overall general fiscal position of the kingdom. Of course, all of this is done with the sustenance welfare of an overall economic development. It has 4 key initiatives: implement the energy and water price reform. So this is conducting impact studies on households and economic sectors and carrying out these surveys and site visits just to understand what is the reform going to impact the economy. We looked at multiple benchmarks, whether what Brazil has done, what Indonesia has done, and we want to make sure that this is something that is manageable, and we are able to mitigate some of the risks or the burdens on the different sectors due to this temporary period of reform. It ensures readiness of the infrastructure and ensures implementation of the entities involved. And of course, more importantly, is to develop communication awareness plans. We need to tell people, where are we going? What's in it for them if we get there? And how do they benefit from that? So far, there has been 2 phases. The first phase was in 2016, and it was minor changes to these different energy products. And the second phase was in 2018. Of course, these were simultaneously implemented with reforms that looks at how do we support low-income Saudi households or struggling competitiveness or struggling industrial sectors that require some programs to help them cope with these different changes. Another program, which is we're very excited about, is the oil sustainability program, and now it's more of the hydrocarbon sustainability program. And it has 3 primary objectives. One is to better understand what is the implication of global trends on the energy ecosystem. So where are we heading with these technologies, with these different tastes and preferences? Identify opportunities to support the global energy landscape and position Saudi Arabia to drive this evolution. This study was conducted with local and international stakeholders of over 100 global experts, more than 10 international universities and research centers, more than 20 research labs, and it came up with about 50 opportunities that were prioritized across the sectors and the different geographies. So some of these, as an example, looks at crude to chemical or carbon to different usage. All of these, they cover the strategic pillars right in front of you: development, innovation, and sustainability. And as an example, we look at clean cooking fuel, clean cooking solutions. For example, in innovation, what are the innovative materials and how do we best enhance carbon capture and utilization, or CCUS? Cleaner jet fuel. What about sustainability? Well, we look at reusable primary packaging for e-commerce. And for example, as the headline says over here, why are we choking on cardboard? So that's a challenge. What's the opportunity? Well, utilizing crude or oil to create these different products, which is reusable packaging. It is more hygienic, easier to ship, durable, suited for many more weather conditions, and guess what? It's lighter than the cardboard box as well. So all of these look at how do we create demand centers for hydrocarbons that are also environmental friendly. Now, the peace de la resistance, as they mentioned, circular carbon economy framework. As you have seen recently in the news, there has been a lot of buzz about this, and this is actually part of our G20 agenda that we're pushing forward. So from a linear perspective, we produce carbon or hydrocarbons, we combust through the usage of industry or different end usage, and we have emissions. But the circular carbon economy, and with its 4 Rs, tries to address the environmental stewardship with that approach. So we have 4 Rs. 1, reduce the need for combusting hydrocarbons. So this is energy efficiency programs, this is renewable energy, this is low carbon fuels. The reuse looks at how do we take carbon emissions for other applications. So we capture it, we utilize it in food and beverages, supercritical CO2, or enhanced oil recovery. In the recycle, we look at how to utilize carbon emissions to create new products, carbon to polymers or chemicals, carbon to fuels, carbon to other materials. And finally, in remove, how do we extract carbon from the atmosphere, whether it's direct air capture, mineralization and storage, or nature-based solutions, such as mangroves and sinks. As I mentioned, this is part of our G20 agenda that we're pushing, and that's probably where the idea of adaptability optionality comes, because it allows for different economies with their different capabilities, comparative advantages, or competitive advantage to really contribute to the problem in a pragmatic way. In line with this, there will be a national program in the kingdom that looks at the different 4Rs and how to promote them, especially across the key emission sectors, such as oil and gas, utilities, manufacturing, transportation, and agriculture. Currently, there are more than 180 ongoing planned initiatives. Now, primarily they are in the reduce or the first R, because it is the easiest to implement and the least cost one. It talks about demand side management and whatnot. And as you progress with reuse, recycle, and remove, the implementation becomes a little bit more requiring of greater effort. These initiatives, as you can see, in reduce, we have 135 initiatives. 75% or 3/4 of them are in the commercial stage. In reuse, there are 25 initiatives, such as in Aramco, for example, the Eastern Province, and Capture and Store, and SABIC as well. In the recycle, there are 6 primary initiatives, again in SABIC and Aramco. And in the remove, there are multiple efforts, whether it's with MIWA, the Ministry of Environment and Water and Agriculture, or with KAUST, for example, which Dr. Bill mentioned in the beginning. So, flexibility synonymous with adaptability with optionality. And the key point here is one solution does not consider the idiosyncratic attributes of different economies. And that's why the circular carbon economy is a solution that can be adaptable and can provide a long-lasting, sustainable issue to environmental stewardship. So let's look at renewables, for example. There's a big hype in the past couple of decades on renewables and what they mean for energy sustainability. Today, using PV, we're around 33% capture, and our technology allows 25%. So the limits for photovoltaic is about 33% capture of energy. Wind, 60%, versus where we are today at 45%. And if you ask anybody, how do we make renewables work? Well, they will say, we need energy all the time, but wind and solar only take place if the wind is blowing or the sun is shining. So we need batteries. Now, a typical battery, a car battery, would weigh about 1/2 ton, but it takes 250 tons to make. If we look at the biggest battery plant, which is Tesla, I think the one they built in Nevada, and with the current rates that they have, it would take them almost 500 years to store 24 hours of power consumption in the US as of today. Just imagine the stress that is needed on the mining activities, on the natural resources for that to take place. For example, if you take a look at a 100 megawatt wind farm, it takes about 30,000 tons of ore, 50,000 tons of concrete, and it powers about 75,000 homes. Now, if we take solar into consideration, it's almost 1.5 times that, not to mention the exploitation of rare earth metals. IRENA estimates that by 2050, we will have twice as much waste as we do today from the approach that we're trying to take with renewables. Look at the lifespan. Renewables, about 20 years versus a typical gas turbine, 40 years. If you want to look at cost, fine. One turbine costs as much as an oil rig. Oil rigs cost 50 cents versus $200 worth of batteries, actually, to store that energy from wind. And its production is 1 barrel per hour versus 10 barrels out of the oil rig. Rare earth metals, such as lithium, cobalt, are needed by the thousands of tons. And it is estimated that it will be between 200 to 2,000% increase in mining activities, which will put us into biodiverse locations. So, it's not about a single solution. It's about balance without exceeding limits. It's being pragmatically realistic and having solutions within reach. So if we ask, is the goal environmental stewardship? Then is decarbonization the only solution? I think not. And the circular carbon economy is a framework that allows for this flexibility, this adaptability. And how do we really move in a pragmatic way. It doesn't discount renewables not by any means. Of course, it's part of the reuse and it's part of what we submit as a sustainable solution, but it's not the only solution. It needs to be on multiple dimensions, which is the 4 R's that we have mentioned. So although we have come to the end of our presentation, the journey for the kingdom has just begun. And we are firm believers in environmental stewardship, innovation, and sustainability. Furthermore, like each and every one here, we believe in flexibility and optionality and pragmatic solutions, innovation and sustainability. Energy affordability, security, sustainability are needed without a doubt, but without flexibility and optionality, well, let's say that plan A is not just going to work. In recent times, daily global emissions have dropped by 17% in early April because of the COVID-19. While overall impacts this year are estimated to be between 4 to 7%. Recent studies actually show that the world will use 6% less energy this year. This is equivalent of losing the entire energy demand of India, by the way. Investment in renewables have been delayed because of the COVID-19. They fell by about 10%, not to mention the timelines that's being pushed. And investments in efficiency and end-use applications are down by 10 to 15%. However, although that's the silver lining, if you want to call it, in the COVID-19, that we have less emissions, but these are not sustainable. These are actually temporary. And that's where we need a sustainable solution. The Saudi-led effort on the circular carbon economy makes way for approaching climate goals and environmental stewardship in something that is flexible and provides optionality to the heterogeneous economies around the globe. This framework demonstrates environmental stewardship, but respects the limit of the natural world as well. Renewables are part of it, but more importantly, so are hydrocarbons, behavioral changes, and everything that provides flexibility for whatever comes our way. In closing, innovation and sustainability requires flexibility, whether it's the trilemma of energy or environmental stewardship. But the optionality states that carbon is not really the enemy, it's the opportunity. And with that, I thank you very much for your time, and we'll open it up for questions, I guess.
Dr. AlMusehel, we very much appreciate your comments, your insight, and your presentation there. It's fascinating, of course, that in the debate last night, the green economy, the green movement has come up as to be quite a center point issue for the United States. And in particular here in Pennsylvania, it's very personal, of course, on a much smaller scale, because as you probably know, the first oil discovered in the United States was discovered here in Pennsylvania, of all places, and not Texas. And we have some tremendous wind farms that stretch across our state. We also have coal-fired power plants and a big mining industry. So it's a tremendous, and fracking now, related to the natural gas, we've become one of the nation's largest producers of natural gas. So all these come with the give and take, with the challenges related to each of them. And so the presentation you make is very important and relevant to us on the macro scale in particular, as we live it here on the local scale. So during your presentation, there have been a flood of students wanting to ask questions. So you've obviously piqued their interest in a number of ways. When I call on the students, I will invite them to introduce themselves, their name, their major, their area of study, and where they're from. I think it'd be interesting to hear as well. Or if you're an alum of Lehigh, what company you're working with at this point. And we'll begin with Alejandro Del Valle.
Hello, I'm a second year. I'm from California, and I'm studying health medicine and society and global studies. My question was, even when we look at our own country, not everyone agrees on what should be done regarding the stuff like this with carbon, all this stuff, especially in Pennsylvania. And so my question was, how does the general public in Saudi Arabia look at this initiative, and is it more negative or positive? And how does this differ from what the government views about this general policy?
Okay, well, thank you very much, Alejandro. This comes or this, the answer to this question actually looks at how do we build these policies? So how do we start understanding what needs to be done? And the way this is done is what we discussed in the beginning. It is consensus driven. It is a bottom-up approach. So a lot of the people that participate are actually, they are citizens, they have families, they have friends, and they discuss how do we, or how did we arrive at these different results? And why is this beneficial for the environment? Why is it beneficial for the country and for the globe as well? That's very important because if this is lacking, it's very difficult to get people to join with you, and especially in policy setting. More importantly, it's also about raising awareness and the programs to manage these communications. They talk about nudging in behavioral economics. That's also part of it. So if I can think of an example of how people got on board with some price reforms from neighboring countries in the United Arab Emirates, for example. So what they did was, prior to changing the electricity prices by 1 year, they would send 2 sets of the same bill. One bill is actually the one that you need to pay, and the other bill talks about what the price will be after price has changed. And if it's red, it means you're really consuming more than you should because of your household and what would be rational consumption. And if it's green, you're doing well. And the idea is they wanted to ensure that they have enough time to comprehend what does this mean for the energy sector and their consumption. Now, this could be part of the increase in electricity tariffs is because there is an additional technology improvement in the mix, whether it's renewables or something like that, or additional gas and so on. So the idea is to understand and to link these big, broad objectives into something that people can buy into. And it's very important that whether you're doing this with public masses, in terms of policy, or you're doing this in a group setting. I know that you probably have a lot of group work, or you're doing this in your job. It's very important that you let people know where you are heading and why you are heading there, what's in it for them, what's the value that they will get from getting there, and how do you plan to get there. This is very important. So communication is the key. Raising awareness is another important part, and offering flexibility. Now, all of these are very important with regards to how do we create policy, but even equally as important is how do we mitigate as policymakers the burden of these changes. So for example, if I increase energy prices suddenly, I'm putting my industrial sector at risk, I'm putting my agricultural sector at risk, I'm putting my low income households at risk because they are not able to pay these additional requirements. Again, energy is a necessity. I mean, you might look at some risk mitigations in any country, and they say, part of risk planning, or if you want to call it business continuity in a smelting plant, for example. Oh, we have to secure the raw materials, we have to ensure. But guess what? If electricity goes out, that's $300 billion out the door. So it's understanding that energy is really a necessary cornerstone of any economic activity, and household expenditure and all of that makes it easier to understand how do we bring these policies together? What are the dimensions that we need to consider from a holistic perspective? And how do we motivate the public to consume in a more rational way, as well as understanding why are we doing all of this in the future? Thank you very much for your question.
Of course, the U.S. is heavily accused of being a consumer culture, so it's our challenge as well. So next is Madeline Leavitt, followed by Jack Narducci.
Hi, thank you so much for this presentation. I really enjoyed it. I have 2 questions. So my first is, how many women currently hold positions in the committee regarding the Saudi energy efficiency program? And I guess my second follow-up question is, as Deputy Minister, are there any plans in the future for the Kingdom to support or sponsor women-led energy development projects?
Okay, well, thank you for these questions. Very interesting. And I think given the past changes in our transformation, there's a great deal of female involvement in the workplace, in innovation, in the government, really. And we're extremely proud of that. I mean, in 2017, a long held, if you want to call it, obstacle was removed, with women being able to drive, being to contribute, and be part of the economy. And this is very important. In terms of your second question, so as a DM, what are the plans for women-led energy projects? Actually, one of my general directors is a colleague of ours. Her name is Dr. Abir Al-Alayan. She's a petroleum engineer. She holds a Ph.D. in petroleum engineering, and she's leading 2 energy projects right now. So there is big support, of course, and understanding that we are able to involve multiple people. It doesn't matter what is their gender, what is their race, or what is their religion. The idea is, can we reach a consensus with the right ideas? And if we get there, is that applicable? And will it make a better economy for us and a better future? So by all means, I mean, yes, in the past, I would say maybe 2 decades before 2016, women involvement has been not as optimal as you would hope it to be. And there are a number of different factors. They could be cultural, they could be even the drive in the women themselves to be part of this big movement. But as soon as the Vision 2030 came on board, and as soon as everybody bought into the transformation of the kingdom from where it was to what it can be and what we can contribute, it was everything goes, all doors open to everybody. And that's very important. And there is great involvement from our female colleagues. We have a number of different, of course, targets. And there is, if I'm not mistaken, there is additional equity in terms of compensation. It's actually higher than what is available in the US for our female colleagues between their counterparts in the different government entities, different regulations and committees and whatnot. So involvement is there, of course. And I invite you to just Google any of these different programs, and you'll see the number of females that are participating and what they are doing and what they are leading. In fact, one of the offshoot of the G20, which is the Civil 20 or the C20, is being led by Princess Noor. There are multiple women leadership in the different programs. So thank you very much for your question, and it's really making everyone proud of how we are able to come together and really deliver on something that will be beneficial for the country and the globe, hopefully.
Lehigh regularly produces very qualified chemical engineers, including many females as well. So I'm sure they may seek that as a job opportunity at some point there as well. So
absolutely, would be happy. We're recruiting talents as we speak. So right now, within our deputyship, actually our female colleagues are on 35% of the workforce, and of different levels of expertise, and we couldn't be any prouder.
Well, thank you. Jack, we'll turn it to you next, please.
Sure. So my name is Jack Narducci. I studied business here at Lehigh, and I'm from New Jersey. And I just want to start off by saying I thought your presentation was extremely interesting. A lot of very astounding numbers. My first question had to deal a little bit with that was touched upon earlier as the public consensus regarding the energy changes in Saudi Arabia. But since you kind of touched upon that a little bit earlier in the question panel, my other question was that earlier you spoke upon one of the most astounding numbers to me was that the decrease from 65% to -8%. Now, it was my understanding that had to deal with advancements in emissions, but if you could just touch upon that number a little bit more, I just wanted to hear a little bit more about that, as I thought that was probably the most outstanding number out of the whole presentation.
Sure, thank you very much. Actually, we get, I get that question a whole lot. And the idea is, as we measure energy intensity, so this is kilograms of oil equivalent per GDP. Between 1990 and 2012, the growth rate was around 65%. So this is being measured in growth rates, not necessarily levels per se. In the last 6 years, so from 2012, actually more than 6 years, 8 years now, that number has dropped to -8%. So we are decelerating our energy intensity. Now, how was this achieved? Well, primarily, it was the Saudi Energy Efficiency Center that is basically the umbrella that started it all. And the idea was, we looked at how do we minimize these energy intensity usage, right? Whether it's industry, whether it's sectors, whether it's in households. So even looking at the ACs and cooling, district cooling. For example, we even looked at having multiple programs. We had a program that was very successful, which dealt with exchange program between outdated air conditioning units and new ones that are highly efficient. Part of what was done was the standards or the stickers that you actually see, and it tells you how efficient is this equipment, whether it's a car, whether it's AC or television. And the release of an application where if you can just scan that barcode, it will tell you how will it affect your energy bill or electricity consumption. Another program that we're working on right now is cash for clunkers, basically, or a clunkers program for outdated or highly emission vehicles that are available on the road, or some of them are abandoned, some of them are not in usage and whatnot. So that entire thing, and that also links to how the public also views these efficiency. Once that application was released with that standard and all of that, it allowed you to have 34 million people that are monitoring how the efficiency of these equipment that being imported or created or manufactured in the kingdom is being utilized. And that created or opened the doors for multiple understanding. You find people in their 80s and 90s, they, at some point in time, electricity was very cheap. They could not care less whether or not they left their AC on while they traveled. But now they look at it and they understand that there is efficiency, there is rationalization of consumption, and that also adheres to our goals going forward, whether it's for the sustainability of the sector or for the sustainability of future generations in the kingdom, and of course on the global setting. Another part is, it's very simple economics, right? If I give you a piece of pizza and I tell you this is $1, you'll probably eat 15 slices, right? But if I tell you this is $5, you'll eat 3 slices. Same concept. If energy was really cheap and it was subsidized and incentivized at that time, people will consume it without a care for how does it impact the environment, how does it impact our fiscal position, what stress does it put on the government and the projects, and it consumes funds that might have been redirected for higher economic impact elsewhere, right? So energy prices and the reform of energy prices incentivizes efficient consumption. So that reduced energy intensity as well. And at the same time, it has pushed for innovations. So we have a restaurant chain here that deals with pizzas. And I'm sorry, I keep talking about pizzas. I think I'm a little hungry, but so they produce pizzas and they compete with Domino's and Pizza Hut and whatnot. And in the ongoing concern of localization, energy prices and whatnot, they have employed multiple solutions, whether they deal with robotics, with automation, to help facilitate or bring down that bill and ensure that they are still profitable. So energy price reform incentivizes efficient consumption of energy resources, and at the same time pushes for innovation of how do I retain or how do I improve my profit positions as any sector operator would tell. So thank you very much, Jack. Wonderful question.
Thanks very much for your comments here. We'll turn to Professor Dork Sahagian, please.
I think you're on mute, Professor.
There, that's much better. Very interesting discussion, and I wonder, Saudi Arabia is underlain by one of the world's largest fossil aquifers of water. Now, these plans that you've described for energy transition should serve the kingdom for many decades to come, sustainability. Is there a comparable plan for sustainable water use, or will that be something that is going to become a new limiting problem for the kingdom?
Well, thank you, Professor. That's an excellent question as well. So what we have discussed here is a sustainable plan, not only for the kingdom. This is for for a global setting. It's part of what we will be pushing in the G20 policy. And you saw the ministerial energy meeting a few days ago where everybody endorsed this idea because it does provide optionality and flexibility. Now, how do we look at this from a water perspective? As you know, the kingdom is, although it's not my specialty in terms of water, but we are at least one of the largest water producers via desalination. And desalination is an energy intensive activity, as you know. And part of the energy mix that we have developed, which looks at how do we utilize the most efficient energy resource to generate power. So this is primarily focusing on thermal and renewables. In terms of the percentages, and this is just a quick view, we're targeting 40 to 45% of thermal and up to 50% of renewables. And this, of course, depends on what is the economic growth that will link to energy demand. But these are the ranges of these different components. And we might maintain between 5 to 8% of liquids. This is for the must-run plants and hard-to-reach areas. Part of that plan, actually, and in collaboration with the Ministry of Environment, Water and Agriculture, is looking at their long-term plan for water desalination in terms of output and how many plants we need and what would be the energy requirement. And guess what? Reverse osmosis, if you are familiar with it, or RO, is far more efficient, and it uses electricity. So part of when we optimized our energy mix is we took into consideration what are these plans and how do we best enable an efficient as well as a plan that hopefully will cover our water demand for the next 35 years. So it is part of it. And I wish I could speak more on the details of that plan. Unfortunately, I'm not privy to it as of now, but without a doubt, it has been through the approach that we have discussed, being consensus driven. And that's the beauty of it. You get multiple dimensions. You get people from the water sector, you get people from households, from industrial sectors, petchems, and all of that. And everybody comes in the room and understands that what we need to achieve our goals is this amount of energy. Now, can you supply that amount of energy? And that's where our job comes in to look at what is the best way to supply that energy that's being demanded for the least cost and most environmental way possible. Thank you very much, Professor.
We have time for probably 2 more questions. Let's turn to Faisal Al-Sarani, please.
Hey, thank you. Professor Zarani, master degree student at Lehigh in mechanical engineering. Concern about what is what's contribution of individuals in sustainable energy, such as if you see here, we have here in the United States a PV as individual in home or in houses, PV plants for electricity supply. Does there any plans for individuals in contribution in sustainable energy in Saudi Arabia?
Sure, thank you very much, Faisal. So the issue of distributed generation or rooftop solar has been looked at multiple times. And while the kingdom or our policy has not been to restrict that. If you want to go and install rooftop solar, by all means. But it was, or it is important that we explain what are the financial trade-offs and whether it is economically feasible for any household at current prices to install that solar and try to benefit from it. So as long as, in a similar process, as long as the policymaker is privy to all relevant information, we make sure that all the public is privy to all relevant information. So they are able to compare how much it will cost me on the medium run or long run to install rooftop solar, and how does that translate into cost savings versus just sticking with the grid and looking at the new energy mix that hopefully will optimize system reliability and cost. So all of these are presented to the consumer at the end, and at the end, it's their decision. If they want to install rooftop solar, by all means. If they want to buy an electrical vehicle, okay, fantastic. It's just making sure they are able to make that decision. And again, it comes back to the concept of flexibility, which is synonymous with optionality. We give you that option. That option is available as policymakers. It is available for consumers as well. Thank you, Faisal.
The last question goes to our engineering systems professor, Rudy Shankar.
Honorable Minister, I'm Rudy Shankar. I'm the director of the Energy Systems Program. And our mission is to develop world-class leaders in energy. And it was so interesting to hear your strategy going forward, which, by the way, mirrors a lot of what other countries, specifically the US, is also wanting to go forward on. In other words, renewable energy, as we know it, solar, PV solar, or wind, cannot by itself solve the carbon problem. And there needs to be large-scale decarbonization of other industries other than electricity, like industrial environment, using hydrogen as a fuel instead of carbon. And so it's a very exciting time. I think students would be motivated. And our mission is to develop world-class leaders through our Master of Engineering program. We'd love to work with you. Lehigh is known for having a very experiential-based program. And I think we're trying to follow in those footsteps, and we'd love to work with you. And thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Professor. It's extremely exciting to hear about this as well. And again, it's really about providing the ability for multiple economies, to address the environmental stewardship problem or issue with different methods based on their comparative advantage. Decarbonization on its own is not the answer, as we have seen. And even in the utilities sector, that's actually one of the biggest contributors to emissions. I think it's more than 15%. So if we want to solve really the environmental issue, let's not focus on electrical vehicles now. Let's focus on the utility scale and how do we best optimize the energy mix there to minimize these emissions. Hydrogen, without a doubt, is part of our plan, and there are, of course, multiple initiatives as I presented in the one of the slides. We are looking at blue or gray hydrogen. Of course, we prefer blue because of the carbon capture component. There are green hydrogen efforts, whether they are NEOM and other places within the kingdom, Aramco, Capsarc, and Kaust. All of these different entities participate in that strategy going forward. So it is really, if I were to summarize all of this, I would say, one, it needs to be consensus driven. Everybody that has anything to do with it needs to be on the table to discuss it. Two, it needs to be a bottom-up approach that focuses on the economics of these solutions before applying a political lens on it or a political spin. Third, it needs to be flexible and provides optionality to the policymaker and the decision maker, as well as the end consumer, such that we are able to achieve the same goals from different paths. And at the end, hopefully, all paths will lead to Rome. And what I will say is all paths hopefully will lead to environmental stewardship, starting with the circular carbon economy that we hope is something that is pushed on a global scale for whether net exporters or net importers of hydrocarbons are able to adapt. And I'll be more than happy to share additional details on the circular carbon economy and what we plan or what are the programs that we have and how to deal with it. And hopefully we'll find benefit in it and a little more assurance.
Thank you.
AlMusehel, thank you very much for your presentation. I think we have heard a number of different opportunities for potential collaboration and some synergy in our mission as well, particularly in the role that we play with sustainability and energy systems, but also on a larger scale, our role with the United Nations in greening all of the UN missions and larger protocols there. So, should the opportunity allow, we'd certainly welcome the chance to meet with you or your staff to have further discussions on that front. So,
It would be my pleasure.
at this point, we'll turn it to Lehigh student Dan Rudiak for the formal vote of thanks.
Hi. أدرس لأقول نيابة عن جامعة ليهاي شكرا دكتور المسهل دراستك على النفط والطاقة المتجددة. So I'd like to thank on behalf of Lehigh University and the LUUN program partnership. Thank you, Dr. Musehel, for your presentation. It was very well put together and it was very interesting. I would also like to thank our co-sponsors for the event, Sigma Phi Delta, Global Union, and the Middle Eastern Student Affairs Club. Middle Eastern Student Associations Club. Thank you to everybody that showed up. Thank you to the faculty, the staff at Lehigh, alumni and students. Safe to say we all learned a lot about the energy sector at Saudi Arabia and the future investment in renewable energy.
Thank you very much for these kind words, and it's always a pleasure that we are able to share our views and visions going forward on the energy sector. Once more, I thank you, Dr. Bill, and the rest of the team. Thank you for this, and it's been really a great experience for me.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon and enjoy your dinner.